So with the passing of the national security law recently, do you see this as a challenge to the one country, two systems as promised by China since 1997?
I think there have been more concerns expressed outside Hong Kong than within Hong Kong. A lot of foreign statements and travel warnings would have people believe as though we were in deep turmoil. But I'm in touch with a lot of expatriate members of our community and multinationals, and there is no panic. Of course, there are understandably questions about how the new law would be implemented. But a lot of multinationals told me they are here for the long haul, and there's no plan to get out of Hong Kong.
Right. And do you think this new law will undermine Hong Kong's judicial independence?
I see the new law, and also the implementation rules made in early July. The new national security law came into effect in Hong Kong on 30th June, and then the government made implementation rules. I see this exercise as a joint effort by central authorities and Hong Kong authorities to fill the gaps in our legislation. I think the central authorities have tried to draft the new law in a way that is as close to the common law way as possible. And then the implementation rules, I believe, were completely drafted by Hong Kong lawyers. No doubt there will be new offenses. As to how these offenses would be, dealt with by the prosecutors and how they would be adjudicated by our courts, will test our common law systems. It will be a test of our common law systems. In other words, a test of one country, two systems. But I think it is an overstatement to say that it will mark the death or the end of one country, two systems.
From a health angle, the Hong Kong people have been doing a marvelous job in containing the virus. But at the same time, we are being faced with pressure from different fronts. For example, going back to the national security law, since last week, I think the US president has revoked Hong Kong's special status, and the country would potentially sanction Chinese and Hong Kong officials. What do you think are the consequences? And are you worried about this since you might even be affected yourself?
I don't think I will be included in the first wave, and I'm not worried even if I were targeted. Now, actually, on 27 May, Secretary Pompeo already said that he can no longer certify Hong Kong as being different from mainland China. And so he would withdraw the different treatment of Hong Kong under US laws and programs. The withdrawal of most favored nation trading status doesn't really affect us very much because US has the largest single trading surplus with Hong Kong. They sell a lot more to Hong Kong than we sell to the US. And requiring us to removing the exemption for license in the case of strategic commodities exports, the impact is very limited. It's purely removing the license exemption. We can still apply. Other provisions in the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, like stopping the training of police officers, that doesn't really hurt us, So, and there are possible sanctions against individuals identified as having having become involved in enforcing the national security law. The sanctions are blocking of assets and denial of visas. The first wave might include some Hong Kong officials, but from public records, it looks like that none of our officials have assets in the US, and many have said that they are not intimidated.
I see. So in that sense, you are not too worried that Hong Kong will be losing its role as an international financial hub, or what's your overall opinion of our current status?
I think the US measures are carefully calibrated not to undermine Hong Kong as an international financial center and business hub, because that would also hurt US interests and other European, Australian interests in Hong Kong. If you look at statements from the American Chamber of Commerce, I think that should be viewed as the canary in the cage, in the coal mine. First statement, 2nd July, was expression of concerns, quite understandable. 7th July, the statement was really to ask the US government not to take drastic measures. There are 85,000 US citizens in Hong Kong, 100,000 Australian citizens in Hong Kong. US, Australia, they do really good business in Hong Kong.
What's your relating to that? What do you see of the closure of the embassy in Houston the other day, and now China is requesting the U.S. embassy to close, I think in Chengdu or something. I think it's happening right now. How are you seeing all those being intertwined?
It's a consulate in Houston.
All right.
A lot of people thought, all these are done on a reciprocal basis. Some people have said that the Houston consulate was paired with Wuhan. Some people speculated that Chinese MFA would close the Wuhan consulate, but instead they picked the Chengdu consulate. I have no insider news on why they picked Chengdu, but definitely I don't think Hong Kong is on the drawing board. Hong Kong's consulate is very important to the US and to us, of course. The American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong is the largest AmCham outside the US.
Now, I see a lot of questions already from the audience. Let me ask one of them. Consider international media reports on Hong Kong have been pretty stark and dramatic, such as bank accounts being opened elsewhere, money being moved somewhere, fund managers pulling out. Well, I'm not moving out, but some do. Technology companies abandoning the city, like just 2 weeks ago when TikTok decided to pull out. Are there any misperceptions that you would want to correct? Have the international press gotten it wrong?
The Western media's narrative is one-dimensional. They like to describe the situation as assault on Hong Kong's freedoms. And they turn a blind eye to the events of the past year, which were assaults on our freedoms, assaults on our property, injury to innocent people, targeting of Chinese-related businesses or even individuals who spoke Putonghua. They turn a blind eye to these unacceptable violence events and just painted the situation in Hong Kong as Beijing suppressing Hong Kong freedoms and all that. In fact, there are plenty of Hong Kong people who long for a return to stability, order, and security, and welcome the passing of the national security law. I think at least 40%. If you look at polling outcomes over the past 23 years, the pro-China camp at best got about 45% of the votes. Even in last year district council elections, the pro-China camp got 43% of the votes. Hong Kong's political cleavage is about China, your perception of China and your perception of one country, two systems. So at least 43% of the community is supportive of national security legislation. It's unfair to portray it as just assault on our freedoms or repression of our rights and freedoms. It's totally unfair and not founded by reality, the facts.
Right. So here's another question from a person from the UK. Part of what makes Hong Kong so special is its can-do attitude, the can-do spirit, we always say. It always evolves. How do you see Hong Kong evolving now then? What are we supposed to do?
I think we need to reinvent ourselves. The government needs to be re-engineered in many ways. I think the problems with our government, we have problems with the legislature too. The problems with our government is it is too bound in the old ways, not sufficiently innovative. And we have problems with the legislature, you know. We have imported some of the least desirable practices from Western democracies, a lot of filibuster, a lot of political gridlock, which has affected our efficiency. I think the next administration must take more bold and decisive measures to implement reform, retooling of our government, a reintroduction of order in the legislature, and reforms to tackle our land and housing shortage, wealth gap, you know, our anemic economic growth, a narrow economic structure, and education.
Right. And here's another question that relates to what you just said. China has been pushing the Greater Bay Area and its economic developments. This area has a combined population of 70 million people and a GDP of around 1.5 trillion US dollar. With what's been happening in Hong Kong, do you think Hong Kong can indeed integrate into the Greater Bay Area and benefit from this development?
In recent years, Chinese authorities have introduced measures to assist Hong Kong people to study, live, and settle in the Greater Bay Area. In fact, it has loosened up professional qualifications for our surveyors, architects, engineers to practice in mainland China. That's all very welcome. But I think there will be bolder measures ahead because Vice Premier Han Zheng has said publicly he would help Hong Kong solve our land and housing shortage problem. And recently, Ta Kung Pao, the blue chip Chinese newspaper in Hong Kong, has been reporting that the central authorities would be willing to help us resolve our land shortage problem by allowing us to reclaim in Chinese waters certain islands in Zhuhai and in the Pearl River Delta have been pinpointed. You know, for example, the media have been talking about Guishan Island in Zhuhai, which is only 4 kilometers away from Lantau. I think to facilitate greater integration, I've always advocated reclaiming in Zhuhai, mainland waters, to produce land much faster, much cheaper, and also moving our container ports. You know, in the entire Greater Bay Area, there is much more capacity for container traffic than business. I think we should move our ports in, some of our ports in Kwai Chung to the Greater Bay Area to consolidate, and then we can release over 350 hectares of land in Kwai Chung for redevelopment. So I think when we have dealt with national security and COVID, you know, when we have returned to greater normalcy, there will be a lot of scope for bold and daring measures to promote greater integration with the Greater Bay Area. There will be a lot happening.
So I'm a fund manager myself, so I assume property sector is not dead yet. There could still be a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to overcome our supply side constraints, land and labor, through leveraging the resources of Greater Bay Area.
I've got a question from one of the audience asking about the space economy. I think maybe he's been reading Elon Musk a lot. You think Hong Kong has any of those opportunities, he asked?
Well, the recent rocket sent by China to explore Mars has a camera made by Hong Kong Polytech University. I think we take part in the nation's space program in our own small way. You know, some of our scientists do have the ability to produce products which can be used in China's space programs.
Wow, Mrs. Ip, you seem to know everything. So on that note, I would really want to thank you for showing up today and sharing your expert opinion on so many topics. And without any more questions from the audience, perhaps we should thank Mrs. Ip for coming on Zoom today and taking part in this program. Thank you so much, Mrs. Ip.
Thank you, Ronald.